For many years, Halloween 5: The Revenge of Michael Myers has worn the moniker in the franchise as one of the bastard children. It's not one of the movies in the series that a lot of people have a ton of fondness for. It usually ranks near the middle to the back end of people's rankings. People said it swung for the fences, tried a bit too much, didn't explain enough, and just got a little too weird for them. What if I told you that the original idea for Halloween 5 was even weirder? After the relative success that Halloween 4: The Return of Michael Myers was, Mustafa Akkad immediately greenlit a sequel. They were going to strike while the iron was hot and immediately go into production on Halloween 5. So they needed a script, they needed a filmmaker, they needed to know where to go next. Dominique Othen and Gerard set up a meeting with Mustafa Akkad. Dominique was a French filmmaker that had a very unique style. If you've watched any of Dominique's movies, and he's done a lot of lower budget made-for-TV films, he has a very specific style. See, with this European touch that he brought to it, it was almost kind of highbrow for the late 80s. Dominique had a meeting set up with Mustafa Akkad, and during that meeting, he asked if he could also bring in a friend and fellow scriptwriter, Robert Harders, into it. Harders had a script, Dominique really liked the script, and he wanted to pitch it to Mustafa Akkad. They gave the pitch to Mustafa, but after about 20 minutes, Mustafa interrupted and said, part of being a producer is being able to make important decisions alone. So he ended the meeting there. Dominique would go on to rewrite the script. There were credits from Shem Betterman, Michael Jacobs, and we ended up getting the movie that we got. Halloween 5 is a movie that went into pre-production and even filming without a finished script. They were changing things almost daily. Rewrites were happening almost daily. But what was the initial version that Dominique Othen and Gerard and Robert Harders had pitched to Mustafa Akkad? Well, it was quite different. See, their idea was to pick up right where Halloween 4 left off, but it was going to go in a very different direction. Michael Myers was at the bottom of the mine shaft, as we find him in Halloween 5. Michael was almost going to be held in place at the bottom of this mine shaft, on top of concrete, wires, rebar, entangling him and supporting his body, as Robert Harders said. A storm would be taking place, and lightning would essentially bring Michael Myers back to life. And this was going to be very much an homage to Frankenstein's monster. That is exactly what Harders and Othen and Gerard had pitched. They thought that reviving Michael in that way, this rebirth through lightning, this Frankenstein's monster-esque rebirth, Michael Myers was no longer going to be the embodiment of evil. It was almost going to be like when he died at the end of Halloween 4, whatever evil was inside of him went away. This lifeless body was just a lifeless body. Him being brought back to life, it would almost be like a totally new stream of consciousness. And the movie was going to be a tragedy in a way. See, the villains of this movie were going to be the police, the townspeople, everybody in Haddonfield. Everybody that Michael had harmed directly or by proxy. Michael Myers was not going to be a killer anymore. He wasn't going to be evil. He was actually going to have almost like a friend. That friend was going to be the person that knew him best. And yes, that is Dr. Loomis. And the entire crux of this movie was going to be about Dr. Loomis slowly realizing that the man that he had known for over 20 years as the embodiment of evil truly was just a man, and there was a softer side there. Now, Loomis wouldn't understand how that happened or why. The audience would know, but Loomis would be slowly realizing that there was something worth redeeming in Michael. And the idea was that once Michael was back, because there would be deaths, but they would be unintentional, or they would be caused by the townspeople, not by Michael directly. But while this was happening, the townspeople were going to get riled up into a mob, and they were going to come for Michael to try to kill him once and for all themselves. While Loomis was faced with the dilemma of, after having realized that there is humanity in him and that he has gotten through to him, he now wants to save him from that mob, which would be a completely different route for this franchise to take, because Loomis had given up on that. See, when Michael was a child, maybe he believed there was humanity in there and that he could get through to him. And after decades of realizing that wasn't going to happen, he had resigned himself to the belief that Michael Myers was truly just the embodiment of evil, a soulless killing machine. His sole purpose was to kill. That was it. In this movie, Loomis was going to be faced with the reality. that Michael Myers was worth saving and that he no longer was what Loomis and everybody else thought he was. Now, unfortunately, the mob would have eventually gotten Michael and he would have succumbed to them. He would have died, and Loomis would have been left there as a friend now to Michael and somebody that took care of him for decades, realizing that he had finally broken through to this man, finally seen his humanity, and it didn't matter. He was too late. Michael's turn was too late. It was truly going to be this sad tragedy, a la Frankenstein. And I implore you to read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein if you haven't before, because it is truly a great novel, and it paints that similar tragedy beautifully. Now, to Robert Harder's knowledge, after Mustafa ended the meeting prematurely, he thought that was it. They had no interest in his story idea. He accepted that and he moved on. When in reality, come to find out, Mustafa was going to offer Harders to be a part of the team to rewrite his script. Now, Harders has gone on record saying since that he had no interest in doing that, so had he known at the time that they wanted him to rewrite it, he wouldn't have done it anyway. So it's all a moot point. That, tragic, Frankenstein-esque story was never going to come to pass for Halloween 5. Mustafa Akkad flat out rejected the idea because he felt like fans would hate it, and he wasn't a fan of it. He thought that Michael Myers had to remain the antagonist. You couldn't make him sympathetic. You couldn't now, 5 movies in, try to make him the good guy. And I think he was right. In my opinion, thinking back to this story, I think it's a really unique idea. I don't think Halloween 5 would have been the movie to do that, though. See, Robert Harders has also said he cannot remember what his idea was for Jamie Lloyd, but in the treatment that we have been able to read excerpts from, she wasn't even mentioned. So it's almost like the end of Halloween 4 had no bearing on his idea for Halloween 5, which was the wrong route to go had they gone that way. A lot of people take issue with what Halloween 5 did with Jamie, that they just made her traumatized and in a mental hospital for children because of what she'd done. But at least they addressed it. It seemed like in Harder's script, it was going to be an afterthought. In the ending of Halloween 4, you could not follow that up with it just being an afterthought. I personally believe that Mustafa's instincts were correct here. I don't think audiences were going to line up for a movie like that. Not with Michael Myers, and not in the late 80s. We were in the middle of the slasher craze. People wanted to go see these big, iconic monsters that they'd grown to love kill people, kill teenagers, be spooky. That wasn't going to be this movie at all. So I think it was the right decision not to do that. But this is one of the more interesting unmade Halloween sequels that I have read about, because I think it is such an off-the-wall approach. And for it to have been conceived in the 80s, that's wild to me. But I want to know what you guys think. Would you have liked to have seen this in 1989? Or do you agree with me that the timing just wasn't right for that? Would you like to see a Michael Myers story done like that now? Now that the franchise needs to restart somewhere, would that be a good jumping off point? Say what you will about Halloween 5, and a lot of people will, but I'm happy with the final product we got. It being one of my favorites in the franchise, I think that they did the best with what they could. Knowing that the script was rewritten over a dozen times, I think it came out pretty solid. But we'll never know what the public would have thought if Michael Myers had become the good guy.